The gymnasium was already shaking before the challenge began. Hundreds of people had packed into the old arena that evening. Martial artists sat shoulder to shoulder in the stands, instructors whispered among themselves, and photographers crowded around the edge of the training floor, hoping to capture the next spectacular moment. The air smelled of sweat, canvas, and old wooden benches. Everywhere Bruce Lee looked, he saw people waiting to see someone prove something. Strength, speed, pride, power. And then the doors opened. A tall, heavily built Taekwondo champion walked onto the floor. He was the kind of fighter who knew exactly how intimidating he looked. His white uniform was already marked with sweat from his earlier matches, and a dark belt was wrapped tightly around his waist. The crowd immediately began cheering. He had won 3 matches that evening. The first opponent had lasted less than a minute. The second had barely managed to land a kick. The third had been knocked backward so violently that the audience had fallen silent before erupting into applause. The champion loved every second of it. He walked slowly toward the center of the floor, looking around at the crowd as if searching for someone. Then he raised both hands. "Is that all?" The cheering faded. He smiled. "Come on." Nobody moved. He looked toward the martial artists sitting along the front row. "Any real man here?" A few people laughed nervously. Others looked away. The champion turned in a slow circle. "Anybody?" Silence. Then he pointed toward one of the instructors. "You." The instructor shook his head. The champion laughed. "Of course." Then he looked toward the opposite side of the arena. And that was when he noticed Bruce. Bruce Lee was sitting quietly near the back. He wasn't wearing a flashy uniform. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't trying to draw attention. He simply watched. His eyes followed the champion's movements carefully. The champion noticed. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither man moved. Then the champion smiled. "You." The crowd slowly turned toward Bruce. Bruce didn't respond. The champion pointed at him. "Yes, you." Bruce finally stood. The sound of the crowd changed immediately. People began whispering. Some recognized him. Others had heard stories. A fast martial artist. A strange fighter. A man who trained differently. A man who talked about speed, timing, and simplicity instead of trophies. The champion looked Bruce up and down. Then he laughed. "You're the one." Bruce calmly walked toward the floor. "I'm the one standing here." A few people laughed. The champion didn't. "You think you can beat me?" Bruce looked at him for a moment. "I didn't say that." The champion frowned. "Then why did you come down?" Bruce stopped a few feet away. "You asked if there was a real man here." The crowd went silent. Bruce continued. "I thought you wanted an answer." The champion's jaw tightened. He had expected fear. He had expected hesitation. He had expected Bruce to boast. Instead, Bruce seemed almost bored. That made the champion angrier than any insult could have. He stepped forward. "You know what happens when people underestimate me." Bruce looked at his feet, then at his shoulders, then at his eyes. They usually don't get a second chance. The champion smiled. "Good." He raised his hands. "Let's see if you're different." Bruce didn't raise his fists. He simply stood there, relaxed, almost too relaxed. The audience began murmuring. One of the instructors whispered, "Why isn't he taking a stance?" Another answered quietly, "Look at his feet." Bruce wasn't standing still. He was moving. Barely. A tiny shift of weight. A slight turn of his heel. A small adjustment of his shoulders. Nothing dramatic. Nothing the crowd could easily understand. But Bruce was watching everything. The champion's breathing. His balance. His eyes. His hips. His front foot. The slightest movement before the attack. Bruce knew something the champion didn't. A punch never really begins with the fist. It begins somewhere else. In the shoulder. In the hip. In the foot. In the mind. And Bruce was waiting. The champion suddenly lunged. A powerful straight punch shot toward Bruce's face. Bruce moved. Not backward. Sideways. The fist passed beside his cheek. The crowd gasped. The champion immediately followed with a high kick. Bruce ducked underneath it. The kick cut through empty air. Bruce was already somewhere else. The champion turned. Bruce was standing exactly where he had been a moment earlier. Still calm. Still watching. The champion's expression changed. He attacked again. And again. Punchy. Kick. Punchy. Step. Kick. Bruce avoided everything. He wasn't trying to overpower the champion. He wasn't even trying to fight him. He was studying him. And that realization slowly began to frighten the man standing across from him. Because the champion had spent years learning how to defeat opponents. But now he was facing someone who seemed to be learning him. Quick question for everyone, WATCHING. If you were standing in that arena, would you have stepped forward when the champion shouted, "Any real man here?" Or would you have stayed in your seat? Comment below with your answer and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, the UK, Canada, India, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, the Philippines, or somewhere else? And if you enjoy dramatic Bruce Lee stories like this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and stay with us, because what happens next is where everything changes. The champion wiped sweat from his forehead. He had expected Bruce to attack. Instead, Bruce had done something much more frustrating. He had made him miss. Again, and again, and again. The champion looked toward the audience. Nobody was laughing anymore. They were watching him, judging him, waiting. That pressure was unbearable. He had entered the arena believing he was the strongest man in the room. Now, for the first time that night, he wasn't sure. "Stop running," he snapped. Bruce looked at him. "I haven't run. You won't fight me." Bruce's expression remained calm. "I am fighting you." The champion shook his head. "No, you're avoiding me." Bruce took one slow breath. There's a difference between avoiding a punch and avoiding a fight. The champion didn't understand. And perhaps that was the problem. He had spent too many years believing fighting meant proving who could hit harder. Bruce believed fighting began with understanding. The champion stepped forward again. This time he moved carefully. No wild attack. No wasted motion. He had changed his strategy. Bruce noticed. A tiny smile appeared on his face. "Better." The champion's eyes narrowed. "What? You're thinking now." That sentence hit harder than a punch. The champion suddenly exploded forward. His right hand came first. Bruce slipped outside. The left followed. Bruce moved again. Then came a kick. Bruce stepped away. The champion turned. And suddenly, Bruce stepped inside. For the first time that evening, Bruce attacked. His movement was so fast that several people in the audience didn't even see the beginning of it. His hand moved toward the champion's chest. The champion barely reacted. Bruce stopped. The strike had halted inches away. The champion froze. But Bruce wasn't finished. He stepped back. "Your balance is gone." The champion looked down. His rear foot was barely touching the floor. Bruce had seen it before the champion had. The champion slowly reset his stance. His breathing became heavier. "You've been studying me." Bruce nodded. "Since you walked in." The champion's face tightened. "So you've been waiting?" "Yes." "For what?" Bruce looked directly into his eyes. "For you to stop trying to impress everyone." The arena became completely silent. For a moment, the champion looked as though he might explode. Instead, he lowered his hands. Then he smiled. But there was something different about that smile. It wasn't confidence anymore. It was anger mixed with uncertainty. He had finally realized something terrifying. Bruce wasn't afraid of him. Bruce wasn't impressed by him. And Bruce wasn't interested in proving anything. The champion suddenly raised his fist. "Then I'll give you something worth studying." Bruce's eyes sharpened. The crowd leaned forward. The champion took one step. Then another. His entire body tightened. He wasn't throwing another ordinary punch. He was putting everything behind this one. His reputation, his pride, his anger, his need to prove that the smaller man standing across from him did not belong in the same arena. He launched. The fist came directly toward Bruce's face. Vast, hard, powerful. The audience screamed. Bruce didn't move. Not yet. The champion's fist came closer. 10 inches. 8, 6, 4, 2. Then Bruce moved. One tiny step. His body turned. His hand rose. And his fist stopped. 1 inch from the champion's face. Time seemed to disappear. The champion's eyes widened. He could feel the air move against his skin. Bruce's fist was right there. Close enough to end the confrontation. Close enough to change everything. But it didn't touch him. Bruce held it there. Perfectly still. The champion couldn't breathe. The entire arena had fallen silent. Bruce slowly lowered his hand. The champion stared at him. For the first time that night, there was no arrogance in his eyes. Only realization. He had finally understood what the crowd had just witnessed. Bruce hadn't defeated him by hitting harder. He had defeated him by showing that he could hit him, and chose not to. The champion swallowed. "Why did you stop?" Bruce looked at the fist he had just withdrawn. Then he looked back at the man. "Because stopping is part of control." The champion said nothing. Bruce turned away. But before he could take another step, the champion spoke quietly. "Wait." Bruce stopped. The champion lowered his head. "Do it again." Bruce turned. "What?" The champion looked at him. "Show me how you stopped." And suddenly, the entire atmosphere of the arena changed. This was no longer about who was stronger. It was about whether a proud fighter was finally ready to learn. Bruce smiled slightly. "That's a better question." The crowd began to applaud. Not because someone had been knocked down. Not because blood had been spilled. But because everyone in that room had just witnessed something far more difficult. A man had been given the chance to destroy his opponent and had chosen control instead. Bruce walked back toward the center of the floor. The champion followed, and this time he wasn't walking toward Bruce as a challenger. He was walking toward him as a student. But neither man knew that the lesson Bruce was about to teach him would change the way he looked at fighting forever. The arena was still buzzing. Nobody had left. Nobody seemed willing to move. The champion stood in the center of the floor, staring at Bruce Lee as though he were trying to understand a puzzle that had suddenly appeared in front of him. Only minutes earlier, he had been shouting at everyone. Now he was asking questions. Bruce motioned toward him. "Come closer." The champion stepped forward. Bruce pointed toward his feet. "Your stance." The champion looked down. "What about it?" "You're too heavy on your front leg." The champion frowned. "No, I'm not." Bruce smiled. "You just did it again." The champion shifted his weight. Bruce immediately pointed. "There." The champion looked confused. Bruce walked around him slowly. When you want to attack, your mind goes first, your body follows. The champion remained silent. "You think about hitting me," Bruce continued, "then your shoulder moves, then your hip, then your foot." He tapped the champion's chest lightly. "Your body announces your intention before your fist ever arrives." The champion stared at him. "So you saw the punch coming?" Bruce shook his head. "No." "Then how did you avoid it?" "I didn't avoid the punch." The champion frowned. Bruce looked into his eyes. "I avoided the decision that created it." For several seconds, nobody spoke. The words seemed to travel through the entire arena. Some spectators nodded. Others simply watched. The champion slowly raised his hands. "Again." Bruce nodded. This time there was no anger. No audience challenge. No shouting. The champion attacked. Bruce moved. Again. Another attack. Bruce shifted. The champion changed direction. Bruce changed with him. The champion threw a combination. Bruce interrupted the rhythm before it could develop. The champion stopped. "How?" Bruce shrugged. "You're still telling me what you're going to do." The champion breathed heavily. "I didn't move." "You did." "When?" "Before you attacked." The champion looked frustrated. Bruce stepped closer. "That's what people don't understand about fighting. They think speed means moving faster." He raised one finger. "Sometimes speed means moving less." The champion stared at him. Bruce continued. "If you move too much, you create openings. If you wait too long, you create openings. The skill is knowing exactly when nothing needs to happen." The champion lowered his fists. For the first time, he wasn't trying to defeat Bruce. He was listening. Then a voice came from the audience. "Hit him." Another person shouted. "Fight for real." The crowd began to grow louder. Some wanted violence. Some wanted another spectacular exchange. The champion looked toward them. Bruce didn't. He remained focused on the man in front of him. The champion suddenly smiled. "They want a real fight." Bruce nodded. "Do you?" The champion hesitated. That question was harder than it sounded, because the answer wasn't obvious anymore. He had come into the arena wanting to prove he was the strongest. Now he was standing in front of someone who had shown him how fragile that idea really was. Still, pride wasn't dead yet. Not completely. The champion tightened his belt. One more time. Bruce nodded. Fine. They stepped apart. The crowd erupted. The champion lowered his body. His eyes became focused. This time, he wasn't looking at Bruce's hands. He was watching his chest, his shoulders, his feet. He remembered Bruce's words. Your body announces your intention. He waited. Bruce waited too. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Nothing happened. The crowd became impatient. Someone shouted, "Come on!" The champion didn't move. For the first time in his life, he was learning patience. Then Bruce smiled. The champion saw it. He understood. Bruce wanted him to attack. But this time, the champion refused. Bruce took one step forward. The champion stepped back. Bruce stepped forward again. The champion didn't panic. Their movements became almost like a conversation. Step. Pause. Step. Pause. No punches. No kicks. Just two fighters trying to understand one another. Then Bruce suddenly moved. The champion reacted. But it was a feint. Bruce stopped. The champion realized he had moved too early. Bruce pointed toward him. There. The champion exhaled. You tricked me. No. Bruce shook his head. You tricked yourself. The champion looked away. That sentence stayed with him. Because it was true. Bruce hadn't forced him to move. Fear had. Expectation had. The need to respond had. His own mind had beaten him before Bruce ever touched him. Pause for everyone. WATCHING. What do you think is more important in a fight? Strength, speed, or control? Write your answer in the comments. And tell us where you're watching from. We want to know how far this story has traveled. If you're enjoying this story, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay until the end, because the lesson Bruce gives this champion becomes much more personal than anyone in that arena expects. The champion sat down near the edge of the floor. He was exhausted. Not physically, mentally. Bruce sat beside him. For several moments, neither man spoke. Finally, the champion said, I've won everything I've entered. Bruce looked at him. I know. I've beaten men twice my size. Bruce nodded. I know. I've trained every morning for years. I can see that. The champion looked toward him. Then why did I feel helpless against you? Bruce remained quiet. Then he said, because you were fighting me. The champion frowned. What else was I supposed to do? Fight yourself first. The champion looked confused. Bruce pointed toward his chest. Your anger. Then his head. Your fear. Then his hands. Your need to prove something. He paused. You were carrying all of that before you even threw the first punch. The champion stared at the floor. Bruce continued. When you walked into this room, you already decided what was going to happen. The champion nodded slowly. You decided you were going to win. Yes. And when you saw me, I thought you were easy. Bruce smiled. And that was your first mistake. The champion laughed quietly. It was the first genuine laugh of the evening. Then he became serious. What was your first thought when you saw me? Bruce answered immediately. That you were dangerous. The champion looked surprised. Bruce continued. Anyone who has trained hard enough to become dangerous deserves respect. The champion's expression softened. But you were also angry. Yes. Why? The champion hesitated. Then he finally admitted. Because I was tired of people doubting me. Bruce looked at him. Then you weren't fighting those people tonight. The champion slowly looked up. You were fighting every person who ever doubted you. The champion's eyes dropped again. Bruce had found the real opponent. It wasn't another fighter. It was the man's past. His insecurity. His hunger for approval. His fear of being ordinary. The champion had spent years building a powerful body because he believed strength would finally make people respect him. But tonight, one calm fighter had shown him something painful. Strength could make people fear you. It couldn't make you confident. That had to come from somewhere deeper. Suddenly, an older instructor approached. He had been watching everything. He looked at the champion. Then at Bruce. I've never seen him stop like that. Bruce smiled. He stopped because he finally started thinking. The instructor nodded. Then he turned toward the champion. You wanted everyone to fear you. The champion said nothing. The instructor continued. Now you know what real fear feels like. The champion looked at Bruce. Bruce didn't smile this time. He simply said, fear isn't weakness. The champion listened. Fear is information. Bruce pointed toward the floor. When your body tells you something is wrong, listen. Then he pointed toward the champion's head. But don't let fear make your decisions for you. The champion nodded. Slowly, he was finally beginning to understand. But then something unexpected happened. A young student near the front of the crowd stood up. He couldn't have been more than 15. He looked nervous. He raised his hand. Mr. Lee. Bruce turned. Yes. The boy swallowed. Can you teach me how to stop a punch like that? The crowd laughed. Bruce smiled. Come here. The boy walked onto the floor. His hands were shaking. The champion watched carefully. Bruce stood in front of the boy. Punch me. The boy froze. I can't. Why? Because you're Bruce Lee. The audience laughed again. Bruce shook his head. That's exactly why. The boy looked confused. Bruce stepped closer. You're already afraid of losing before you've even started. The boy raised his hand. Bruce nodded. Now punch. The boy slowly threw a weak punch. Bruce didn't dodge. He caught the boy's wrist gently. Again. The boy attacked. Bruce moved. Again. Another punch. Another movement. Again. Faster. Bruce moved with him. Then Bruce stopped. He looked at the boy. What did you learn? The boy thought. That you're faster than me. Bruce shook his head. No. He pointed at the boy's feet. You stopped being afraid after the third punch. The boy looked down. Bruce smiled. That was the lesson. The champion watched silently. Then he realized something. Bruce hadn't come into the arena to prove he was better. He had come into the arena and somehow turned a confrontation into a classroom. The champion stood. He walked toward Bruce. Everyone became quiet again. He stopped directly in front of him. Then slowly he bowed. Not because he had been defeated. Because he had finally learned something. Bruce returned the bow. And for a few seconds, the two men stood there in silence. But the night wasn't over, because outside the arena, reporters were already waiting. They wanted the story. They wanted to know who won. They wanted to know how Bruce Lee had stopped a champion's fist inches from his face. But Bruce knew the truth was more complicated. The real victory had happened long before that fist stopped. It happened when the champion finally stopped trying to prove he was a real man and started asking himself what being a real man actually meant. The doors of the arena opened slowly. Outside, the night air was cool, but the crowd spilling into the street was anything but calm. Everyone was talking. Everyone had seen the same thing. A champion had thrown one of the hardest punches of his career. Bruce Lee had stopped it. Not after impact. Not after being knocked backward. Before it happened. 1 inch from the champion's face. Photographers pushed through the crowd. Reporters shouted questions. Who won? Was that a real fight? Bruce, how did you do that? Were you trying to embarrass him? Bruce kept walking. He didn't answer. Behind him, the Taekwondo champion emerged from the building. The reporters immediately surrounded him. Did Bruce Lee beat you? The champion stopped. For a moment, his old pride returned. His jaw tightened. He looked toward the arena doors. Then he said something nobody expected. No. The reporters looked confused. No. The champion shook his head. He didn't beat me. A reporter raised his microphone. Then what happened? The champion took a breath. I beat myself. The reporters became silent. The champion continued. I walked into that room thinking I had something to prove. He looked down at his hands. Bruce showed me I was wrong. Then he walked away. But the story didn't end outside the arena. Because the next morning, something unexpected happened. The champion arrived at the training hall before sunrise. For years, he had trained alone. He had always believed that champions should be the first to arrive and the last to leave. That morning, however, he wasn't there to train. He was there to wait. At 6 o'clock, nothing. 6:15. Nothing. 6:30. Still nothing. Then the door opened. Bruce walked inside. The champion stood immediately. Bruce looked surprised. You're early. I didn't sleep. Bruce smiled. Why? I kept thinking about yesterday. Bruce put his bag down. And the champion hesitated. I realized something. What? I've spent years learning how to hit people. Bruce waited. I never learned how to listen. Bruce nodded. Good. The champion looked confused. That's all. Bruce smiled. That's enough for one morning. The champion stepped closer. Will you train me? Bruce looked at him for a long moment. Then he asked, why? The champion opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Bruce waited. Finally, the champion said, because I want to become better. Bruce shook his head. That's not enough. The champion frowned. Then why? Bruce walked toward the center of the empty hall. Because if you only want to become better than other people, you'll never know when you're good enough. The champion remained silent. Bruce pointed toward the floor. Stand there. The champion obeyed. Relax. He tried. Mori. The champion lowered his shoulders. Mori. He exhaled. Now forget yesterday. The champion closed his eyes. Bruce said quietly, Forget the crowd. The champion breathed. Forget your reputation. Another breath. Forget me. The champion opened his eyes. Bruce nodded. Now we're ready. The first lesson was not a punch. It was standing still. The champion couldn't understand it. He had expected speed, power, footwork, combat. Instead, Bruce made him stand. For 10 minutes. Then 20. Then 30. Sweat began running down his back. His legs started to ache. Why are we doing this? He finally asked. Bruce answered. Because you don't know how to be still. The champion frowned. I can stand still. No. Bruce pointed at his shoulders. Your mind is moving. The champion said nothing. Bruce continued. You're waiting for the next instruction. Yes. You're waiting to impress me. The champion lowered his head. Yes. You're still fighting. That sentence hurt. Because it was true. The champion had brought his pride into the training hall. Bruce wasn't teaching him how to throw a faster punch. He was teaching him how to stop needing one. Pause here and tell us what you think. If you had been in Bruce Lee's position, would you have accepted this champion as a student after he challenged you in front of everyone? Yes or no? Write your answer in the comments and don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. If you're enjoying this story, like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves Bruce Lee and martial arts stories. And stay with us, because the final lesson is the one the champion never expected. Days passed. Then weeks. The champion kept returning. Every morning. Before sunrise. He learned to breathe. He learned to move. He learned to watch. Most importantly, he learned to stop reacting emotionally. Bruce would sometimes throw a sudden movement toward him. The champion would flinch. Bruce would smile. Again. Another feint. The champion moved. Again. Another. The champion remained still. Bruce nodded. Better. One morning, Bruce stood across from him. Attack me. The champion hesitated. Are you sure? Bruce smiled. That's already too much thinking. The champion moved. His first punch was fast. Bruce blocked it. The second was faster. Bruce stepped aside. The champion changed direction. Bruce followed. Then the champion did something different. He stopped. Bruce stopped too. They looked at each other. The champion smiled. Bruce smiled back. What did you learn? Bruce asked. The champion answered. That I don't have to finish every movement. Bruce nodded. And that I don't have to react to everything. Bruce nodded again. And the champion thought. Then he said, that winning isn't always about making the other person lose. Bruce's expression changed. That answer mattered. Now you're learning. The champion bowed his head. But Bruce wasn't finished. Tomorrow you're going to fight someone. The champion looked surprised. Who? Bruce pointed toward the doorway. A young martial artist stood there. He was smaller, much smaller, and visibly nervous. The champion stared at him. I'm supposed to fight him. Bruce nodded. The young man stepped onto the floor. The champion looked uncomfortable. This isn't fair. Bruce smiled. Good. The champion frowned. Why is that good? Because now you're thinking about the other person. The fight began. The young fighter moved quickly. The champion could have overwhelmed him. He had the size, the experience, the power, but he didn't. He waited. He watched. The younger fighter attacked. The champion stepped aside. Another attack. He moved again. Then the younger man lost balance. The champion caught him before he fell. The room became quiet. Bruce watched. The young fighter looked surprised. "Why didn't you hit me?" The champion smiled. "Because I didn't need to." Bruce nodded. That was the moment he knew the lesson had finally reached him. The champion had become the man he had been trying to become all along. Not stronger, not more dangerous, more controlled, more aware, more human. But there was one final test. That evening, the champion returned to the same arena where everything had started. The seats were mostly empty now. The lights were dim. The floor looked different without hundreds of people surrounding it. He stood in the exact spot where he had shouted, "Any real man here?" Bruce walked beside him. The champion stared at the floor. "I was a fool." Bruce shook his head. "No." The champion looked at him. Bruce continued, "You were young. I thought strength meant people couldn't hurt me." Bruce nodded. "And now?" The champion looked around the empty arena. "Now I think strength means knowing when you don't have to hurt anyone." Bruce smiled. For a few seconds, neither man spoke. Then the champion raised his fist. "Do you remember this?" Bruce looked at it. "The punch." "Yes." The champion smiled. "I thought that was the strongest punch I ever threw." Bruce raised an eyebrow. "And now?" The champion slowly lowered his hand. "Now I think the strongest thing I ever did was stop." Bruce nodded. "That is the difference." The champion looked toward him. "Between what?" Bruce answered quietly. "Being powerful." He paused. "And being in control of your power." The arena fell silent. Then the champion asked one final question. "Bruce." "Yes." "If you had hit me that night, would I have learned the lesson?" Bruce thought for a moment. "No." "Why?" "Because then you would have remembered the pain." The champion listened. Bruce continued. "But because I stopped." He looked directly into his eyes. "You had to remember the lesson." The champion's eyes became wet. He turned away for a moment. He didn't want Bruce to see. But Bruce did. And he said nothing. He simply placed a hand on the man's shoulder. The champion finally whispered, "Thank you." Bruce smiled. "Don't thank me." The champion looked at him. "Then who?" Bruce pointed toward the empty arena. "Thank the man you were yesterday." The champion didn't understand. Bruce explained, "If you hadn't walked in here with all that pride, you might never have discovered how much you still had to learn." The champion slowly nodded. Then he bowed, this time deeper than before. Bruce returned the bow. And that was the end of their confrontation. But the story of that one-inch punch stayed alive. People remembered the fist. They remembered the silence. They remembered the champion's stunned expression. They remembered Bruce Lee standing inches away from his face. But those who had been there remembered something else. The punch wasn't the most powerful moment. The most powerful moment came afterward, when Bruce had every reason to strike, and chose not to. When the champion had every reason to remain proud and chose to learn. And perhaps that was the real lesson. Because anyone can throw a punch. Anyone can lose their temper. Anyone can shout. Anyone can demand respect. But very few people possess the discipline to stop when they have already proven they could win. Years later, people would still talk about that night. Some would exaggerate the story. Some would argue about how fast Bruce had moved. Some would say the champion had been lucky. Others would say Bruce had been. But the people who were actually there remembered the silence. They remembered the fist hovering 1 inch from a man's face. And they remembered what happened next. Bruce Lee lowered his hand. Not because he was afraid. Not because he doubted himself. But because he understood something that his opponent had only just begun to learn. Real strength is not the ability to destroy someone. Real strength is having the power to do it and the discipline not to. The arena lights slowly went dark. Bruce walked toward the exit. The champion remained behind for another moment. He looked at his hands, then at the empty floor. And for the first time in his life, he didn't see a place where he had lost. He saw a place where he had finally begun to understand himself. He smiled. Then he turned off the last light and walked into the night. So tell us, what did you learn from Bruce's 1-inch lesson? Was it about speed, control, humility, or knowing when not to strike? Leave your answer in the comments, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story inspired you, hit like and subscribe for more dramatic martial arts stories.